Integrity, the root word integer, which means one or whole. And when you have integrity, you should be one man, one woman, wherever you are. You have to be one person. At home, when no one's looking. At work, same person. At school, same person. Because that's integrity. When you're a person of integrity, that is what you should be living.
Earlier, you introduced me as a man of God, leader of men. And I talk about in the book that everybody should have a vision statement. And that is my vision statement, man of God, leader of men. And what's the beauty of a vision statement is it helps you make decisions in your life, and you put those decisions against that vision statement. Does it hold true? Whatever I do is going to honor God, and it's going to be a leadership role. So when I come at a crossroads and say, should I do this? The question is, does it honor God? And the second question is it going to help somebody in leading them?
First is culture. And we have tackled culture numerous times in the podcast, but that is really because it is so elusive on how people can grasp and concretize culture. It's not something that you're going to have a formula with. It's not something that I could just give you a blueprint of. What is so important about it that is one of the 4 pillars of your book?
Well, look, every organization is going to have a culture. It may be a culture that you haven't designed. Maybe it's a culture that you didn't want, but it's like an organism. It's going to happen. So I always tell people, look, you might as well take the time and the effort to try to design a culture that you want breathing in your living organization. Because if you don't spend that investment in time, it will be there. But it may be a toxic culture. It may be a culture that you don't want in your organization, but because you didn't pay attention to it, it kind of just took a life of its own and it happened. The second thing I'll talk about a culture is never negotiable. So if you're in an organization and you can have, let's say it's a young organization and you don't know what your culture is going to be, you can have all the discussion up front to say what our culture should be. But once you decide what that culture should be, you can't have dissension. It's going to be that culture. And if people don't buy into that culture, then they don't belong in your organization. In fact, I tell young executives all the time, because I guess in the old days, when I was a younger executive, 3 career moves in a span of about 25 or 30 years was, that was acceptable. Now you have people changing jobs, 3 jobs in 5 years, right? So there's a constant, that's the as constant turnover. But I tell folks, look, it's very easy in today's world to look up a company and look at their website, look at some articles, and as soon as you look at their website, their culture and their vision should be apparent. If you don't see it or if you don't understand it, that's a yellow flag. And then also do yourself a favor and say, could I live in that culture? Could I, be really good and achieve stuff in that culture? How will I function in that? And if it's not clear to you, don't even take the interview, because I guarantee you within 6 months or a year, you will leave because you will hate it, or they will ask you to leave. Right? So that's why culture is so important in an organization. And then it's also equally important because the culture of an organization is the equivalent to a person's character. When you have your character, I see people, and I even heard this in one of the teachings or one of the podcasts, that you should have a different character where you're at work, and it's okay to have a different character at work or at school or at home or whatever. And I say that's the furthest thing from the truth. I have the same character, whether I'm at home, whether I'm at work. And it wasn't always like that, but I learned that if you don't, you become schizophrenic, because you say, okay, well, what situation am I in now? How should I act? When I was a younger executive, I was really, really professional and serious at work. I said, look, you can't mix relationships and friendships at work, because you have to be, very professional at work, and you have to conduct yourself that way. And then in the social circle, in my private circle, I was pretty much a wild maniac guy, right? I had energy, but the energy that I channeled at work was very professional energy, and the energy that I channeled in play was, crazy. I spent probably about 6 months to 9 months working with these 2 gentlemen. We did a project in the Midwest. So every Monday we would get on a plane, fly out to Kansas City, and work there for the whole week, and then fly back on Friday. So during the week, we were always together. You know, we went out, we had dinner, we had drinks. So they saw me. And then I guess about a year later, a year and a half later, they came out to our weekend house as guests. And about halfway through the night, they pulled my wife over and she goes, Tom, there's seriously something wrong with your husband. So Kathy goes like, well, what do you mean? She goes, he's like very different. He's like totally a different person. Like he's schizophrenic. You got him checked out. And Kathy goes, that's just Tom. So that kind of, you know, the light went on and said, look, you know, you can have fun at work. I mean, yeah, you don't have to be a crazy guy at work, but it's okay to form friendships. It's okay. In fact, it's healthy to form friendships at work. And then as I grew on later in life, I mean, we made it to a point always to have, you know, weekends with wives, you know, coworkers that we work together and build that family atmosphere. You know, that's kind of, you know, one of the lessons, you know, I learned about, you know, character, of being consistent on where you are. And the other thing, if I could just share with your audience, there's 3 questions every person should answer themselves. It's what I call Venn diagram. You got 3 circles, and then each circle contains a question, and where the 3 circles intersect, that's your sweet spot. So the first question is, who are you? Ask yourself a question, who are you? And who I am, and I mentioned to you earlier on, is I'm a servant leader. So I'm very clear on who I am, and not everybody is. And I encourage everybody that's listening to you to identify who they really are. The second question is, what are you passionate about? Right. So I'm passionate about helping younger executives become better executives. I'm passionate about getting older executives to be better executives. So I'm passionate about helping folks become better. And then the third circle is knowing what you're good at. If you have a clear picture of knowing who you are, knowing what your passion is, and knowing what you're good at, and so many people that I know they're not passionate about what they do. You know, they do it for a paycheck. Life is too short. You know, don't do it. If you're not good at something, you know, some people think they're good at it, but, you know, actually they're not that good at it. So just do some self-evaluation, have other people evaluate you and say, hey, Tom, you know, you think you're good at this, but you should maybe do something else because you're really not that good at this. But once you find that sweet spot, I guarantee you that you will be successful. I learned something else.
I want to rewind a little bit because you mentioned something that's interesting. The podcast or information that you mentioned earlier, where someone said that you have to have a different character at work and at home. And it is the opposite of integrity, right? Integrity, the root word integer, which means one or whole. And when you have integrity, you should be one man, one woman, wherever you are. You have to be one person. At home, when no one's looking, at work, same person, at school, same person, because that's integrity. When you're a person of integrity, that is what you should be living. When you mentioned that culture is the same as character for an individual, you mentioned there the high importance of culture, because character is very important. That's where your behavior stems from. That's where attitude stems from. All your relationship stems from your character, how other people see you and treat you. And you mentioned that you have to have culture by design. You have to be intentional at it, and it is built by your core values. With character, for an individual, is it the same? Do you design your character? And if so, how do you do it?
Well, I think with character, it's a combination. You said it starts with values, right? And values are something that I believe you learn at a young age, right? So one of my values is honesty. Now, how did honesty become one of my values? Well, honesty became one of my values when I was like, I don't know, maybe I was like 6 or 7 years old. And I said apparently what was a blatant lie to my grandmother. And my grandfather pulled me over and smacked me across the face so hard that my head bounced off the wall. The smack hurt, but what kind of woke me up even more than that, it was like, what could I have said that ticked off my grandfather so much that he smacked me so hard across the face? And then when I put it all together, I was like, all right, well, it's not good to lie, right? It's not good to lie because A, I got smacked, but B, I really got somebody really upset. So that's a value that I learned when I was 6 or 7, and that's a value that's with me today. So I think your character is formed as a result of the environment you're in and really the way God created you. So look, if you're in an environment where you see your parents being dishonest, and you see, your family being dishonest, and, their lie. And then probably that's, unfortunately, that may be one of your values that you grow up with and you adapt because that's what you saw growing up. So values, I think, are extremely important in establishing character, and it comes from your environment, what you learn, and it also comes from, how God created you.
It's so funny because when you mention environment, your environment has a culture, right? You have a culture at home. So you could argue that your character is a product of your culture at home. And if you become a founder of your own company, that character that you have becomes your de facto culture, which you mentioned earlier on the pre-show. Here's the thing, Tom, a lot of founders, a lot of leaders, when we're starting up, we pay no attention to these things. Culture is a buzzword that flies over our heads. I know it was for me, like culture, I don't have time to think about that. I only have time to think about where am I going to get the next meal for me and my team. So what happens is, you're completely right. My character just seeps in to the culture, but it doesn't form, concretize, or make the culture. What happens in between that and finally the founder being woken up and sitting down and saying, okay, this is not going well. I have to design my culture.
The sign will be dissension, right? The sign will be dissension. So the reason character is a de facto corporate culture, because think about it, right? And this actually was a lesson for me because, when I used to work for large companies, whether that was Colgate-Palmolive, whether it was Philips Electronics, whether that was Reckitt Benckiser, when I had to hire somebody, it was an easy draw. I mean, I would get people with executive MBAs from Oxford or Harvard. They all wanted to work for us because the brand name of the company stood for something, right? That was the draw. And then I opened my own business in 2004, 2005. And, they were like, well, who the heck are you and why should we work for you, right? So in a startup organization, the founder's character is so important because that's why people will come to work for you. They buy into you because you have no company. Right? It doesn't exist. It's an idea. You're an entrepreneur. You're starting something up. So the only draw is you. So either people buy into you, they buy into your character, and then the company grows because some great people, some talented people came and bought into you, and your company grew. Or your character wasn't that strong, and people maybe tried, but then they said, nah, I don't buy into this. This is not for me. And they left, and your company didn't grow. And then if you're mature enough, I mean, one of the things when the three of us, I mentioned to you early on that I have two business partners. One is a retired Navy SEAL, and the other guy is a very smart marketing guy. And our company is called Culture Force. I said, well, look, if we're all about culture and trying to transform companies' cultures into a positive culture environment, how about if we start with our own culture? And let's define our culture going to be. So we spent, a bunch of time together, the three of us, and say, what will be our culture, right? Because the other thing that happens is in that example, right? So you have, if you're a single entrepreneur, then it's really, just your culture. But when three people get together and they do not pay attention to the culture, well, everybody's character is going to be a little bit different. And if you don't address that elephant in the room, 4 or 5 years down the road, one of the guys who are partners, whose character is very different than the other guy's character, and his character maybe didn't dominate, and the other person's had a stronger character and that dominated, like 3 or 4 years down the line, they're going to say, well, this is not what I signed on to. I'm out, right? Because one partner's character dominated and they never addressed what the culture of the organization should be. It just became the de facto culture by whoever had the strongest character. And then ultimately, somebody says, not for me anymore.
Really good point right there. And Culture Force, that's an interesting name.
Oh, hey, and since you're here, can you do me a favor? Can you hit on the subscribe button and hit the bell button and select all notifications so that whenever we have a new video, you're going to be the first one to know. Until then, keep leading.
We have some companies in our world today that actually was kind of like that. They kind of stole the idea. We have Uber, we have Lyft, Grab. They have the same business model, but the first ever one that did that business was actually Lyft. but we don't know them now because the others stole the idea and flew with it.